Welcome to Silent Life with me, James King. In this video I'll be demonstrating my method of applying traditional gesso to a panel for painting in oils. To see how to make the glue size and the gesso, you'll need to watch the relevant video, a link for which is in the description below. This video is dealing with how to actually apply the gesso, which is no mean feat, so here we go. We're starting with a sheet of hardboard, or MDF, 6mm thick, firmly fixed to a wood frame or chassis. The first thing you need to do is sand it down a little with medium grade sandpaper. The sanding should be done in the open air if possible. Make sure there's no sign of rain though, as a drop of water on the surface of your panel will need to dry before you proceed with the sanding. So back inside the studio, you're ready to apply a thin coat of glue size. This first coat of size should be a bit more dilute than the glue size used to make the gesso. That's to say 1 part glue granules to 25 parts water by weight, not volume, as opposed to a 1:20 ratio for the glue in the gesso. Again, this will be made clear. This is made clear in the video about making gesso. Now leave this first coat to dry with the board laying flat. Never try to speed up the drying with a hairdryer or radiator or any other kind of technique. This will just lead to cracking. After about an hour or less in the height of summer, the board will be sufficiently dry. So give it a light sanding and then you're ready to apply the first coat of gesso. Wet the back of the board first to prevent warping. Then just dampen the front surface. The sponge needs to be broad and soft and wet enough to evenly dampen the surface, but not so wet as to leave puddles of water, of course. You'll get a feel for this very quickly. Apply the warm gesso while the surface of the panel is damp. This allows you to make several strokes with the brush, thus creating a nice smooth coat. The gesso needs to be lukewarm and well stirred. Be careful, you can only make half a dozen or so passes with the brush before it starts to dry. This is the main challenge when creating a gesso panel, and you'll probably have a little bit of trouble at first. Don't try to touch up any irregularities because these can simply be sanded smooth between coats. In between the coats, the gesso will tend to set a little and a skin will sometimes form. You don't need to worry about this, it will dissolve back into the gesso when reheated. Be sure to reheat the gesso using the double boiler before applying each coat. Maybe add a spoonful of water each time to offset the loss from evaporation. Now apply the gesso with a very broad brush in smooth parallel strokes. I make a mark on the back of the panel to remember how many coats have been applied. It is absolutely essential that you dampen the surface of each dried coat after sanding and before applying a fresh coat. Applying a wet sponge to the white gesso surface requires a bit of nerve, as it might seem counterintuitive, but if you try to apply a coat of gesso without dampening the previous coat, it will just make an awful mess. Each successive coat should be applied at right angles to the one before it. The first coat will look very thin and unsatisfying when first applied, but it will become more pale and opaque as it dries. The first few layers will always appear stripy when wet. Just leave them to dry and then lightly sand them. The effect will even out as you apply more layers. From here, it's simply a question of repeating each step until you have the thickness of gesso you require. Personally, I like to apply between 6 and 10 coats. So, to recapitulate. Let each coat dry before lightly sanding the surface. Then wet the back and front before applying the next coat of gesso. Mark the back of the panel for each coat of gesso. Apply each coat perpendicular to the last. The sandpaper should be progressively finer with each coat until you are using a very fine grade to smooth off your final coat. I found that about 400 milliliters, or approximately 13 fluid ounces of liquid glue size mixed with the same weight of whiting is enough for several coats on a 1 meter square panel, approximately 10 square feet. Once you've achieved a nice smooth surface, you can then customize the degree of absorption and the color of your painting surface. A coat of 1 part mastic or damar varnish to 1 part turpentine should be applied and rubbed in with a soft cotton rag. Then apply another coat of this same Terps varnish mix, plus, and this is optional, plus some mid-tone oil colour, which creates a transparent veil, or if you like the Italian word imprimatura. I generally use raw sienna or raw umber for this, but I sometimes experiment with more lively colours, and you'll know what's best for your own work. So there you are. I'm afraid there's no getting around the fact that this method is time consuming, but I always make at least 3 panels at once to make it worth my while. I'm sharing this technique in the hope that it will save some of my fellow painters the heartache and frustration that I've had to go through in the process of acquiring it. The neglect of technical instruction in most art schools is well known, but I believe personally craftsmanship for a painter is like technique for a musician. It's almost impossible to make anything worthwhile without it. So I'll be happy to answer any technical questions in the comments below. Don't hesitate to subscribe if you'd like to see more, particularly about the paintings hanging here in the background. For the moment, thanks for watching, and goodbye.